Okay, delegates, we are on Principal Report Section 5, Northern Ireland Building the Peace. We'll be calling on the Assistant General Secretary Peter Bunting to introduce the Northern Ireland section, Building the Peace Report. Also, there will be a PowerPoint presentation during Peter's presentation. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, Minister, comrades, once again I have the privilege of introducing the Northern Ireland section of the Executive Report. I wish that the news I bring was better, that I could be more optimistic for our society and the prosperity and security of the people we represent, that our communities were at ease with each other, and that our elected rulers were dedicated to the progressive betterment of all who live in Northern Ireland. I wish that I could tell you all here today that 17 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, that the pledges made at that time by the politicians were honoured, and that Northern Ireland had not become a political football for parties in Stormont and, for that matter, in Dáil Éireann. When I last addressed this gathering 2 years ago in Belfast, I declared that the trade union movement was the opposition to the enforced consensus from Westminster. That consensus was that the economic deficit was the gravest crisis we faced, and that the only cure was austerity heaped upon austerity. The Tories have just been elected on a manifesto they had never dreamed of having the chance to impose in the country. It was a right-wing wish list, even far right by European standards, and was designed to be their opening round in the event of negotiating a coalition administration. And now, as everybody knows, and nobody expected, they have a majority in the House of Commons and the backing of a rabid Tory press to do the following: to reshape employment law in Great Britain to ensure that it will be virtually impossible to go on strike, and even then, to open unions to unlimited claims by any passing complainant; to legalise scab labour by allowing agencies to supply strikebreakers; to bankrupt unions by removing the check-off system of union subs; to shrink facility time for union activities such as representing members and encouraging union learning; to make political campaigning by unions as difficult as possible, thus attempting to silence us further. All of this building up to their ultimate goal, the removal of the United Kingdom from the European Union and its progressive labour legislation. They want to go even further, removing the UK from the European Convention on Human Rights, obliterating the Human Rights Act, a core component of the Good Friday Agreement. This only bolsters our determined campaign for a Northern Ireland Bill of Rights. On top of that, they wish to open the NHS and education provision to private operators, outsource public services to the preferred providers, Circle, Capita, A4E, and cut taxes even more for the rich. But the major change is their ideological attacks on the marginalised and the working poor under the guise of welfare reform. Northern Ireland is currently being held ransom by the Tories and their welfare bill. Here are the real facts about welfare. I'm going to show you a few slides. The first one you can note from the curve in economic terms on that particular slide is that the spend on welfare has been continuing progressively over a long period of time. But you should also note that there are no huge spikes in that slide and in that curve. And the UK spends 200 billion per year on welfare. The next slide, I hope you can all read it, puts a lie to the fact that the Tories and those who they wish to attack the marginalised are the main recipients of welfare. As you can see from that slide, 40% of all payments on welfare in the United Kingdom go to pensions, senior citizens. 14%, the next highest, is for tax credits, and 12% is for housing benefit. You will note that there is not a huge component of that welfare spend being paid out to those who are stigmatized by being apparently or allegedly scroungers and people who don't want to work. It is, I think, very instructive that you realize what's happening here in the welfare attack on the working class and the marginalised. The next slide exposes that cruel lie that people, again, who are on housing benefit are victims as well. Because you can look at that slide and note that housing benefits has seen a significant increase by over 20 billion pounds in the last 10 years. Why do we have housing benefit? We have housing benefit because we have no social housing. We have housing benefit because the rich landlords put up the rent every year upon year upon year. And that's why we have 20 billion pounds of spend. The next slide shows what we have termed tax credits. Now, tax credits in the United Kingdom are the same as family income support in the Republic of Ireland. And you will note the huge rise in that spend, where we are now subsidising unscrupulous employers who won't pay their employees a decent living wage. That particular part of welfare should be called employers' welfare benefit. And you will see the huge increase in that over the last number of years as well. And the interesting thing about it, the reason for that can be exposed as a huge explosion of low pay right across the United Kingdom. But there is one slide which I've probably jumped over. But what it does, again, illustrate to you is that the number of recipients of tax credit hasn't changed in the last 20 years. It's still 5 million people. Sorry, that's the housing benefit. Sorry, housing benefit. So that's the interesting thing I think you should know about welfare. But let me come back to the tax credits, because they were and they are a good idea. And tomorrow, George Osborne, in his July the 8th budget, will attempt to make the lives of the working poor worse, because his intentions are to tax tax credits. And the problem is that the situation of low wages needs to be challenged. The state is subsidising starvation wages by employers and overvalued rents through housing benefit. The figures are quite mind-boggling and occasionally emerge. Last week, Tesco plc held its annual shareholders meeting in London. There was a mild revolt at the 4.1 million remuneration packet for its new CEO, Dave Lewis. But all went well, and the City of London block vote carried the day as always. Part of the rebellion by some Tesco shareholders was Tesco's low wages. There were demands that Tesco pay the living wage, and then this figure was revealed: £364 million. That is the amount that the UK taxpayer spent on tax credits for Tesco workers last year, according to the campaign group Citizens UK. More than £250 million from the state every year to subsidise a company which had a stock market value of 14 billion before its recent difficulties caused by its incompetent and hugely overpaid management. In fact, Tesco, Asda and Sainsbury's cost the UK taxpayer well over 700 million in subsidies for their low wages, which helped them post profits of 3.8 billion between them. There are only two things that can improve the lot of the underpaid, and neither of them are cuts to tax credits or housing benefit. Those two things which we require to improve the lot of the underpaid are state action on a living wage and collective bargaining. Comrades, we have a fight on our hands, and we can win this fight. Do not listen to the voices of despair who tell you that the odds are too high and that nothing has been or can be achieved. This movement has led the opposition, was vilified for doing so, has delayed and even stopped the worst plans of our opponents. If it was not for the trade union movement standing strong and united, Northern Ireland would be a far worse place for ordinary workers and their families. The entire neoliberal fantasy embedded in the Stormont House Agreement would have rolled out. Welfare cuts for the disabled and working poor, asset sales of public land, privatisation of public utilities, mass redundancies across the public and private sector, and a huge cut in corporation tax for big business at the cost of further reductions in public services. All of the main parties were signed up until someone shouted stop. That someone was the collective voice of this movement, travelling across Northern Ireland and speaking at over 30 public meetings and dozens of union branches, phoning into radio programmes and making noises on Twitter, writing letters to local newspapers and badgering elected politicians. We organised protest rallies and public meetings, highlighting the destructive impact of cuts on local communities affecting health, education, public transport and other vital public services. There were other struggles too. Some we lost, brave fights, such as that to maintain the driving licence agency in Coleraine. But one outcome of these local campaigns in mid-Ulster, on the north coast of Antrim, in South Down, in West Fermanagh, is the daily proof to people who are not members of our movement, realising what a resource to the entire community a strong and active trades council is, how important local trade union branches are to everyone in a town or a village, not only union members. Comrades, we stand with the victims of racist attacks in Belfast as we stand with the victims of power, be they Colombian and Bahraini trade unionists, South African miners, or the children of Gaza. But we are, most of all, the collective voice of our members. On March the 13th this year, many took the ultimate step, a massive strike across all sectors, with thousands filling the centre of Belfast, making clear to the political and media and business class and the overseers in Dublin and London that what was prescribed as the ideal future in the Stormont House talks was not in our name and not in our interest. That dispute is ongoing and will intensify in the autumn. Almost every public sector union has a mandate for some form of industrial action, up to and including strike action. We remain resolutely opposed to the economic and social cost of the Stormont House Agreement and will continue to oppose it regardless of fantasy budgets or backroom deals in Stormont. Stormont House did not address what it was supposed to deal with: the legacy of the conflict, the trauma of the conflict, and the consequences of the conflict. In Northern Ireland, we have the highest suicide rates in these islands, 70% higher than any other region of the United Kingdom. And we also have the lowest paid workers right across the United Kingdom. At the beginning of the whole debacle last December, we submitted to all parties and the three governments a paper which identified 6 reasons why Northern Ireland requires additional funding and not austerity. The 6 areas affected by what we call the troubled premiums are mental health problems. 1 in 6 in Northern Ireland are affected. And most of those, by the way, are concentrated in areas allegedly called or close to the peace lines. Poverty and deprivation, which is persistent and intergenerational, deepened by 40 years of conflict. Security, the most expensive policing in the United Kingdom because of the unaddressed blight of sectarianism, which has led to decades of underinvestment and is reproduced in part by the segregation in our education system, a multi-tiered complex which segregates at the age of 4 by faith and class by 11. Then there is the social cost. 80% of Protestant boys on free school meals leave school without any usable qualifications. In all of these statistics and categories, Northern Ireland is placed among the worst in the United Kingdom. These are the crises that need to be addressed, and Stormont House did not deliver. This month, we will still have massive sectarian tensions and the real chance of sectarian violence because there is no agreement on the causes and the consequences of the conflict from which we are still slowly emerging. Stormont House, welfare reform, transforming your care, a fantasy budget, a deficit crisis. All of the above were portrayed as crucial for rebalancing the Northern Ireland economy. What a nonsense. It was left to the trade union movement to put forward the alternative. So we produced 100,000 copies of a newspaper and sent it to workplaces, community centres, and other public places. Following the General Secretary's initiative on the Congress Charter for Fair Conditions at Work, we launched the Northern Ireland version last week. 2 weeks ago, a new concordate with the student movement initiated by the ICTU Youth Committee in Northern Ireland and NUS-USI, the representative body of over 200,000 students in Northern Ireland. Part of that agreement is to work together to deliver training for youth and student activists in organising on campuses, in workplaces and in our communities. 3 weeks ago, we worked with Amnesty International and the Rainbow Project to deliver the largest demonstration ever in Northern Ireland for civil marriage equality for all of our citizens. These are the tasks we do, promoting equality, decency, education, and the power of collective actions in workplaces and in our society. We have other allies, some in political parties, as well as our friends and members in every community, and our comrades in the trade union movement in England, Wales, and Scotland. We have our arguments fashioned by Neary and other hands and minds in our movement. We have to deepen our engagement with the membership of this movement, develop the next generation of activists, shop stewards, health and safety officers, and union learning reps who will stand in the way of those who wish to drag our society backwards. Comrades, we will lead the resistance to the Tory plan to destroy that which makes our people strong and our society civilised. Every core value of this movement is an obstacle to the Tory plan. We stand for fairness, equality, prosperity, opportunity and justice, the hallmarks of the Good Friday Agreement in words and in spirit. Our business is the unfinished business of 1998. Let us complete this task. I commend the support to conference.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that comprehensive report.